In round 5 of the Alekhine Memorial, Vladimir Kramnik suffered a disastrous loss against the French player Laurent Fressinet. He lost with the white pieces fairly quickly. How could that happen to someone like Kramnik? Let's take a look and let me try to explain perhaps what was going on in this game. So Kramnik opened with knight f3 and wants to play his Reti variation that he played earlier in the tournament, and now knight c6 with the idea e5. Well, of course, white prevents this with d4, and we've transposed to a kind of Chigorin variation. It's been seen before. It's actually relatively standard. It's not seen very often. Queen d7 looks like a good move in order to perhaps play bishop h3 later on to control this diagonal. So therefore h3 looks also very sensible, and the bishop comes back. And now c3. This is a multi-purpose move. Of course, it prevents knight b4, but there's much more to it than that. Perhaps the queen can come out to one of these squares, but also the d pawn is defended, so that means that if black tries, let's say, f6 to force through e5, then white has knight h4, and that bishop is rather uncomfortably placed. Black doesn't want to give up the bishop, but if it comes back to e6, then of course the e-pawn is blocked. And there's another reason for c3. If black castles queenside in this position, then perhaps you can set an attack in train with b4, followed by knight b3, and this is actually quite a pleasant initiative for white. So let's go back. So what did Fressinet play in this position? Well, he simply broke with e5 straight away. And so this is a kind of mix of a Chigorin and an Albin counter gambit, if that means anything. Now, perhaps white should take with the knight here, and that leaves the f3 square available for the second knight to come to defend the e-pawn. But Kramnik played d takes e5. I think this is a kind of principled move. He wants to leave that knight on c6. So he clearly believes that it's not very well placed and is perhaps vulnerable to this attack, as we'll see a bit later. This is rather typical of Kramnik. He's kind of a maximalist. He wants to try and punish his opponent. And here, the most pragmatic move is bishop g2, and perhaps just getting castled, perhaps playing knight b3 and knight d4. And I think white is slightly better here. But as I said, I think Kramnik somehow is quite a formal player. He believes that black has already transgressed the basic rules of chess somehow in giving up this pawn, and he wanted to punish him. So he played e3. Now, if one of my pupils had played this move, I'd be going too many pawn moves and wagging my finger at them. Now, Kramnik wasn't born yesterday, he appreciates that, but let's see why he tried this move. So Fressinet goes to develop the knight and perhaps to win back the e-pawn. And now Kramnik played another pawn move. Now, of course, this is very risky, compromising his king side, and another pawn move. What on earth is he at? The point is this. He now played b5. Now, if the knight retreats or goes to a5, well, let's see knight a5. Then the queen comes out to hit the knight, practically forcing b6. Now there's a threat to take here, so we play, well, either g5 or, actually I prefer rook g1 because that keeps control over the f5 square. So that knight is rather restricted. And here I think white has a very pleasant position. Perhaps this knight will come into d4 to look at c6. This knight is coming into b3, and I think white has a very good position here. Or if the knight retreated here to b8, then again you could either close with b5 and play queen a4, or again possibly, I think I actually prefer rook g1 to keep control over this square. White again has an excellent position. Let's go back here. So what did Fressinet do? Well, he didn't back down. He simply gave up a piece. Now I think this is what Kramnik had underestimated. I think he assumed, well, okay, of course black can give up a piece, but I'm a piece up. I should somehow be able to get a good position here. And I think this explains all these earlier pawn moves. He was very close to punishing Fressinet, but this is a problem. Okay, let's go on. Well, first of all, what happens about the threat to the knight? If the knight comes to d4, then knight takes e5. The knight is looking at these squares, and this is already very dangerous indeed. This bishop is absolutely superb, looking down at this diagonal, preventing counterattacks. So Kramnik gave up a pawn. Now the point is that after this is the game continuation, and now with knight d4, white is able to trade off that dangerous knight, and it looks as though white has security. Now perhaps it's this position that Kramnik was going for earlier. Perhaps he thought his king would be reasonably safe here behind these pawns, but in fact this is a very unpleasant position for white, and I think in practical terms you could almost say that Kramnik is already lost here. The problem is the king does not have a safe home to head for. Obviously the king side is wrecked, but the queen side is also it's just very exposed. It's too difficult to get the king there, and the center, well, if the king remains in the center, then white's forces are split. So let's see how this played out. So bishop g2. Okay, that's another pawn for black. So now we have, let me see, black has 7 pawns against white's 4. So already 3 pawns for the piece, and white still has this problem of his king. And now, again, I think one of the huge problems with this position, I mean, maybe it's not absolutely lost, but I think in practical terms, this is so much easier for black to play. Black has a really simple plan here of advancing the g-pawn and disturbing white's king. Whereas for white, it's very difficult to see how you play this position. Now, maybe knight f1 is a better move here, but, well, I still don't like white's position at all. Instead, Kramnik played queen a4, trying to find some counterplay on the queen side. But this is a really nice move from Fressinet. Bishop h4, threatening queen takes pawn on e3, exploiting the pin, and this leaves white with, well, a terrible decision to make actually. If castle's queen side, that's the move he'd like to play, then simply bishop f2 and e3 is dropping, and that's too much. And the king still isn't secure. Look at that bishop raking across the board. Or king e2, well, just g5, and well, with the advance here, the bishop is embarrassed, and probably the center is going to be broken open very soon as well. Or if castles, again, this move g5, it's so easy for black to play, just advancing and ripping open the king. So Kramnik tried knight f1, defending e3. g5 anyway, it's so easy to play. So that, yeah, well, there's nothing very constructive that black can play here actually, and bishop e4 is an excellent move. And after that, well, clearly black is winning. He's not really down on material here because the rook is kind of trapped. Queen a5 threatens the pawn. Very sensible move from Fressinet, not touching his pawns at all, but keeping rock solid. And now, white would love to be able to play rook b1 to try and get some counterplay here, perhaps. But there's a nice move. Bishop takes f2 and queen f5 check. With a double attack here. Kramnik tried rook c3, but bishop f2 was still a winning move. And here's a very nice tactic, actually. If bishop takes f1, then g3 check. And now a classy winning move, queen f5, which just keeps the king trapped so it can't come back to the f-file. And then on the next turn, rook g8 is going to be mate sooner or later. So king takes f1 was played, but that allows the g-pawn to advance, and this is just horrible. Let's just go through the final moves. There's nothing to do. If queen takes, then the rook comes across, followed by rook g1 check. King e2 is played, rook g8 anyway. Okay, there's a threat of mate, but that's easily parried. And here, well, if the king comes forward, then queen e4 is mate, and going backwards, well, that's equally hopeless. There's also the queen can come in. Kramnik took, but actually resigned here, and well, obviously, black getting 2 new queens will be a little bit too much. So there we go. I think Kramnik basically tried to punish black for his opening play, but just underestimated this piece sacrifice. Thanks for watching.